begin. Hello everyone. First of all, really please excuse us. We're supposed to start at the 10 o'clock. It's 10:20, like over 10:20 right now. I'm really sorry about that. But everybody knows about the special rapporteur is really busy in the morning. So let's just start. The title of our side event is Transitional Justice in the Republic of Korea, a journey for truth and justice. We're going to just start with introduce the participants. Then the first one is really he has like a great work done in this UN Council. Let me introduce the Fabian Savioli, the Special Rapporteur of the Promotion of the Truth and Justice Reparation and Guarantee Seminal Institutions. Please say hello to.
Hello, good morning to everyone.
Thank you, sir, for coming. And then also we came here, the Korean NGOs, on 9 people are here. And let me introduce participants. The Dr. Na-young Lee, the President and Chief Director of the Korean Council of Justice and Remembrance for the issues of military sexual slavery by Japan.
Hi everyone, my name is Na-young Lee.
And the Young-hwan Kim, who is the head of the External Cooperation for the Center of the Historical Truth and Justice.
Hello everyone, my name is Young-hwan Kim.
And then Tae-yoon Kwon, the chair of the Committee on Historical Issues and Reparations, the Minbyung, the Lawyers for a Democratic Society.
Hi everyone, my name is Tae-yoon Kwon.
Let me introduce the more the lawyers. The Choi Wan-seo is Deputy Director of the Public Interest and Human Rights Litigation Center, the Minbyung, the Lawyers for Democratic Society.
Hi everyone, I'm Chewan.
And let me introduce myself. I'm Andy Deok-jin Kim. I work at the Catholic Human Rights Committee in South Korea. So we're just going to start. So let me ask the Fabian Savioli, the special reporter. Please start with your speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello again to everybody. It is my real pleasure being here. I would like to start thanking the organizers of this event, Lawyers for a Democratic Society and the Korean Council for the Women Drafted for Military Sexual Slavery by Japan. I want to inform you that I presented yesterday my report on the official visit that I conducted to the Republic of Korea from 8 to 15 June 2022. The report is online. It's online on the documentation webpage of the Human Rights Council and also in the website of the mandate. The objective of my visit was to assess the measures adopted by the government in the areas of truth, justice, reparation, memorialization, and guarantees of non-recurrence to address the serious violations of human rights and humanitarian law committed during the period of occupation, war, and authoritarian regimes that engulfed the country during most of the 20th century. I would like to share today some of the observations contained in the report. As you all know, the Republic of Korea saw numerous, varied and at times massive human rights violations during the turbulent 20th century, if you allow me. These violations included killings, torture, disappearances, sexual violences, and exploitation, trafficking in person, forced labor, and arbitrary detention. In many instances, the violations were committed on a massive scale for over an extensive period of time. Most of those violations were left unaddressed for decades, while the country continued to struggle with conflict and authoritarianism. When democratic consolidation offered the opportunity to redress the long-standing grievance to victims, the new democratic governments were faced with numerous challenges and demands from a vast number of victims. Addressing this has been a colossal task. The government has adopted several measures to respond to numerous transitional justice challenges it has faced. However, due to political ambivalence, the measures have not been embedded in a comprehensive approach that could adequately and sustainably redress these demands. In my report, I reviewed the measures adopted by the Korean authorities to address these violations. Before sharing some of the main observations of the report, I would like to take a moment to express my sincere condolences and solidarity with the victims of these violations and, of course, to the families of those victims. In the report, I commend the progress made in consolidating the rule of law and democratic governance, adopting a legal framework to address the serious human rights violations committed in the past, and establishing truth-seeking and memorialization processes. Nonetheless, I note that such efforts must be strengthened to ensure that all violations and the suffering of all victims are comprehensively investigated, acknowledged, commemorated, and redressed. With regard to truth, I noted and listed the vast number of truth-seeking initiatives adopted by the government to uncover the facts related to past human rights violations, which are reviewed in my report. While I welcomed these measures and the processes adopted so far in the area of truth-seeking, I urged the government to intensify them and to lift all remaining barriers to access to the truth. The vast number of violations that remain to be accounted for is in itself a challenge. Efforts must be sustained to ensure that all past incidents of human rights violations are duly considered, acknowledged, and preserved for present and future generations. With regard to justice, I am really concerned. I observed with concern the lack of progress in the prosecution and sanctioning of perpetrators of serious human rights violations. So it's clearly an impunity situation. Nonetheless, I welcome the legislative reforms adopted to exclude the application of statutes of limitations to genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as to killings and sexual crimes in certain circumstances, but considered that the scope of the exclusion should be expanded to all serious human rights violations. I also welcomed the measures adopted to facilitate the retrial of persons wrongly convicted and stressed the need to sustain and, where necessary, expand such efforts to assist all related victims. With regards to reparations, again, the report is more comprehensive. I'm just make a synthesis of the report. With regard to reparations, I observed the legal measures adopted to provide reparations to some of the victims of the numerous serious human rights violations committed during the past century, and the reparations received by others through legal claims against the state. However, I note with concern the lack of comprehensive legal framework and a concomitant administrative program to provide full, prompt, and effective reparations to all categories of victims of serious human rights violations, which should encompass measures of compensation, rehabilitation, restitution, and satisfaction. I also observed with concern the application of statutes of limitations for reparation claims for such violations, the high standard of proof placed upon victims who file claims against the state, the collection of fees from victims, that is unacceptable, whose claims have been unsuccessful and the insufficient access to psychological, psychosocial services for all victims. A number of apologies have been issued by various official bodies since 1998. While welcoming these measures, I highlighted that they were limited to certain categories of victims and that most did not fully comply with the requirements of content, scope, format, publicity, officiality, and victim consultation established under international standards. My last report, my last thematic report, has some guidelines in this regard, and I presented a thematic report on apologies 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was presented, but it's in the website of the mandate. With regard to memorialization, numerous initiatives have been taken by the government to commemorate the victims of human rights violations committed in the country in the 20th century. Nonetheless, I consider that a comprehensive approach in this field is lacking and that it would be beneficial to ensure that all violations are officially and adequately memorialized in full consultation with the victims. As for warranties of non-recurrence, since 90s, the country has embarked upon a solid process of democratization. From a transitional justice perspective, the adoption of constitutional, legal, and institutional reforms aimed at consolidating the rule of law, the establishment of a national human rights institution, the ratification of international human rights instruments, and engagement with the international human rights framework are commendable, of course, achievements. However, insufficient efforts have been devoted to reforming and vetting the military and security sector institutions involved in past serious human rights violations with a view to effectively preventing the recurrence of past violations. The situations of victims of serious violations of human rights and humanitarian law committed with the direct or indirect involvement of third countries requires urgent resolution and the joint effort of all concerned parties. The authorities and the counterparts in the relevant countries must proactively engage to ensure the progress is made to provide truth, redress, and reparations to victims, placing them at the center of the negotiations and decisions affecting gender. I have offered my full disposal to the government to provide technical assistance to move forward on the path initiated to account for and prevent the recurrence of past abuses and urge the relevant authorities to continue unabated or to embark on, when necessary, the urgent tasks of seeking comprehensive truth, establishing responsibilities, and providing full reparation for past abuses. As mentioned in my report, not one tragedy, nor one victim should continue to be unrecognized and unaddressed. In this regard, my report provides a list of detailed recommendations addressed to the government and to the international community. I invite all relevant stakeholders to review them and to promote or advocate for their full implementation. I would like to take the opportunity to commend the victims' associations, all my recognition to the job. Civil society organizations and public institutions that have worked to unveil the scale and scope of the violations suffered by Korean society, and to provide acknowledgement to the victims, thus helping them to restore their dignity. The sheer number of atrocities and of persons affected by them makes this work titanic. But also, and above all, vital for healing and reconciliation. I would like to conclude, as I did in my report, by recalling the advanced age of the most Korean victims and the need to provide them with effective responses that fulfill their demands and restore their honor. The relevant authorities should spare no effort to urgently accomplish this pressing task. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Your report and your today's speech is very moving. We all know you did your best to listen to the victims and the activists, and also to carefully consider the view of the Korean government to confirm the facts and make some necessary recommendations. We really thank you about that. Also, the South Korean NGOs support your report and urge the Korean government to accept the recommendations and begin the efforts to implement them. So we really thank you again. Just give a hand again. Thank you so much, sir. And now, the professor in Ion's presentation. Yes, please, start, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. The title of my presentation is Task to Overcome Colonialism During Japanese Occupation. Let me start. During the period of Japanese occupation in various regions, including Korea, millions were subjected to forced labor, and countless women and girls were forced into sexual slavery. Despite the tireless effort spanning 3 decades by survivor victims and the civil society to seek justice and gain international recognition, the unresolved issues continue to cast a long shadow on the present. Regrettably, the Japanese government has not only failed to acknowledge the historical war crimes, but has also taken active steps to deny and distort this dark history, even devising textbooks to downplay these heinous acts. Furthermore, the Japanese government has publicly pressured for the removal and systematically interfere with the installation of a Statue of Peace, attempting to erase the memory of Japan's military sexual slavery. The Statue of Peace, commemorating the courageous voices of survivor victims and their hopes for peace, was initially erected in front of Japan's embassy in Seoul on December 14, 2011. Since then, it has been replicated not only in Korea, but also in various parts of the world through the grassroots activism of countless citizens, including Berlin, Germany. In the face of Japan's government effort to remove the statue, the Korean government has remained seemingly passive, resembling a bystander in these critical matters. Furthermore, in the name of a security alliance, both the Korean and Japanese government appear to have put aside the pursuit of historical truth and human rights. The recent stance of the Yoon Suk-yeol government in Korea, which emphasized the importance of improving Korea-Japan relations, aligns with the Japanese government's claims of having made sufficient apologies and underscored the legitimacy of the 2015 Korea-Japan agreement. This stance has caused immense frustration and anger among survivor victims and the civil society groups. Neglecting historical justice and disgrading UN recommendations, the 2015 Korea-Japan agreement excluded victim survivors and the civil society organizations that have been advocating for justice for nearly 3 decades. As a result, UN human rights bodies have expressed concerns about the agreement violation of victim-centered principles and urged the guarantee of victims' rights to truth, justice, and reparation in accordance with international standards. However, the current Korean government continued to emphasize the agreement legitimacy despite UN Special Rapporteur Mr. Savio's recommendation to revise it to ensure that the surviving victims of military sexual slavery during the Second World War have access to truth, justice, reparation, including satisfaction, and guarantees of a non-recurrence in line with international standards.
Another instance of Korean government's perspective on the victims of human rights violation is the third-party reimbursement plan announced in March 2023. This plan appeared to exempt Japanese perpetrators from legal responsibility for forced labor. It's not only disregarded a legal judgment achieved through years of determined struggle by victims, but also contradicted the verdict of Korean Supreme Court, handling the restoration of these victims' rights. This decision was made without proper consultation with the victims or civil society, leading to feelings of humiliation among the victims. Victims argue that Japanese companies should bear the responsibility for reparation, and the Japanese government must issue a formal apology to the victims. The National Human Rights Commission of South Korea also expressed its grave concerns, highlighting the link between reparation for victims of forced mobilization and the recognition of human rights violation, and the restoration of human dignity through an apology. The South Korean government's proposal contradicts the victim-centered approach emphasized by international human rights standards. Faced with the Korean government's decision and the presence of Japanese perpetrators, several survivor victims and families of deceased victims strongly opposed and refused to accept financial compensation. In solidarity with the victims, the Korean civil society initiated a fundraising campaign that garnered enthusiastic support, delivering 100 million won per person, equivalent to reparations to the 4 victims and their bereaved families in time for Liberation Day in August. The victims are urging the Supreme Court to issue an enforcement ruling as soon as possible, holding the Japanese government and corporation accountable for ignoring the judicial ruling, refusing to apologize, and failing to provide reparation will ensure that the justice sought by the victims throughout their lives is finally realized.
In the meantime, Korean survivor victims of Japan's military sexual slavery, who have tirelessly fought for an unequivocal apology and legal reparation from the perpetrator, find themselves subjected to severe human rights violations and re-traumatization due to Japanese government denials and attacks by far-right historical denialists. For instance, the Wednesday demonstration, which had been held for over 30 years as a space of solidarity with the citizens around the world, and as a platform for human rights, peace, and history education for future generations, has now become a site of hatred and discrimination against the victims. Since late 2019, Korean historical denialists connected to Japanese historical denialists have insulted victims and threatened activists and participants by distorting historical facts in counter-protest during the Wednesday demonstration. To combat this denial, distortion, and spread of false information about Japanese military comfort women, and to address defamation against the victims, we have called for a revision of the Japanese Military Comfort Women Victim Protection Act. The proposed revision was submitted to the National Assembly in November 2020. However, due to opposition from the ruling party, initial discussions have yet to commence at the National Assembly's Standing Committee, despite almost a year have passed. It's with deep regret that we observe the Korean government's apparent ignorance, irresponsibility, and recklessness in this matter. In light of this concern, we strongly urge the government to fully embrace all recommendations made by the Special Rapporteur, expressing deep concern over the perceived regression of the Korean government in matters of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. We hope that Korean government will serve as a catalyst rather than an impediment to the realization of historical truth, historical justice. Our shared goal should be to acknowledge the pain and suffering endured by the victims, address their needs, and work toward a resolution that aligns with the principle of justice and human rights. Healing the wounds of the past and ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated should be our collective commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we had two presentations. Thank you for the Professor Nayoung Lee and then Mr. Young Kim. Thank you again. Actually, we don't have enough time because we have another session at the UN Human Rights Council at 12 o'clock. So we have to go so fast. I will let you speak like 5 minutes for each other. Yes? Mr. Kwan and Mr. Su. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Fine.
Let's start with the Mr. Kwan Tae-yoon.
Yes. First, I would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his faithful report. And I'd like to talk about the state violence during the Korean War time and authoritarian regime. Since South Korea gained independence from Japanese imperialism, the country has experienced intense ideological conflict with people in the south and north of the Korean peninsula following different ideologies. So, in the name of maintaining state order and security, the government suppressed those with opposing ideologies. Those who supported or were suspected of supporting the North system were repressed and even massacred. As the Special Rapporteurs found, special laws exist for the massacres on Jeju Island and Yeosu, Suncheon, but there is no other separate truth commission for the massacres during the Korean War. So only individual investigations through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is ongoing. The exhumation of the victims' mass graves has also been done mostly through civic organizations. The state should be held accountable for the entire civilian massacre through a special law or a separate body. Right? In the light of recent cases, I'd like to make an additional comment. The National Security Act was enacted in the context of ideological conflict prior to the Korean War, and through the act, the regime branded many civilians and political rivals as leftist traitors. Recently, the South Korean government has been attempting to apply the National Security Act crack down on civil society activists and lawmakers who hold Japan accountable for its colonial past. Right? So it's raising serious concerns. As the Special Rapporteur pointed out in his opinion, there were various forms of human rights abuses during the period of dictatorship and authoritarian rule, including the crackdown on the pro-democracy movement, the Gwangju massacre on May 18, 1980, the espionage of abducted and returned fishermen, and the forced internment of street children. I would like to emphasize the cases of espionage of abducted and returned fishermen and forced detention centers which have come to light relatively recently. In its comments on Special Rapporteur's report, the government of the Republic of Korea clarified its position on the abducted fishermen case. The government of the Republic of Korea does not address its own responsibility for manipulating the returned fishermen as spies, but instead places all blame on North Korea. The South Korean government must apologize and take responsibility for its actions in using civilians as spies. Learned of the content of the South Korean government's opinion. Many of them are still hiding their victimization because the South Korean government is not willing to admit its responsibility. The issue of detention centers such as the Brothers Home and Songnam Academy is one of the most recent cases in which state responsibility has been recognized. In its recent comment on Special Rapporteur's report, the government of the Republic of Korea stated that impunity has been achieved, but there was a systematic attempted cover-up during the investigation and trial of the former head of the Brothers Home. The prosecutor general apologized for the cover-up, but the government has not corrected the wrongdoing. No reparations have been made to victims of the Brothers Home and Songnam Academy, some of whom are pursuing individual lawsuits, and many are still being held in detention centers unaware that they were victimized by the state. Finally, the South Korean government has taken it for granted that victims will have to file individual lawsuits to receive compensation for past events. Furthermore, the South Korean government attempts to shift the burden of proving damages to the victims in litigation process and to avoid liability through the state statute of limitations. However, the victims are suffering greatly as they go through the litigation process. They have to talk about the facts of their human rights violations, and seeing the perpetrator, the state, deny the violations or language. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kwan. Okay, let's continue with the Mr. Chon.
So I have prepared a presentation to introduce.
The microphone, please.
Yeah, I have prepared a presentation to introduce the current status of the legal framework in the Republic of Korea in the respect of transitional justice. So I would like to start to talk about we feel really thankful to the special rapporteur. Maybe your mission is ended today. How our journey starts for transitional justice. So I would like to highlight the issues of Republic of Korea's current legal framework with respect of transitional justice. So what I would like to point out, the first problem is absence of victim-centered approach. So rather than being enacted in full consultation with victims, the laws was enacted from the perspective of the state. So there is a need to revise the laws to ensure meaningful participation of victims and to ensure full redress for victims on the basis that truth, just reparation, and non-recurrence are the rights of victims and the obligation of the state. The second thing that I want to point out is lack of legislation on torture and serious human rights violations in Korea. So international human rights standards, including those related to transitional justice, call for special legal and institutional protection for victims of torture and serious human rights violations. But the Korean legislation does not define what is torture or what is serious human rights violation nowadays. So I think the law should adopt those kind of international standards to current criminal acts and other related norms. And as Special Rapporteur pointed out, the repetition of impunity is very serious problem in Korea. As Special Rapporteur noted in his report, there are virtually no cases of high-level officials being strictly punished for past human rights violations. This injustice caused by impunity is recurrent in various problems in Korean society. Last year, on October 29th of October, 159 people visiting Itaewon during Halloween festival died and hundreds were injured due to the government's failure to prepare and respond to the incidents, even though it was predictable and has been reported by citizens. Afterwards, the government, rather than holding those in charge, such as minister with authority accountable, the government conducted an investigation only to identify a narrow space of responsibility. So the problem of impunity, which has been repeated in past human rights violation, is being repeated in serious human rights violations occurring in Korean society today. I also like to point out the problem of access to truth and justice is not guaranteed in Korea. According to the international human rights standards, victims of past human rights violations should have access to the truth and guaranteed remedies at all times. However, no legal framework to realize those truth and justice. No fundamental legal framework is established right now. Truth Commission in South Korea, including the Second Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, have ended their activities with insufficient support and time limits. So many victims cannot access to the truth and justice nowadays. So we have to consider the special laws, or we have to change our legal system that all victims can get access to truth and justice at all times. So I'd like to conclude. I believe that realizing transitional justice is not just a matter of the past. It is a matter of building a better society. So I conclude my remark by emphasizing that governments and members of our society bear an enormous responsibility in ensuring that many victims pass away with their dignity undermined and without redress. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seok. Now it's like we cannot agree the South Korea government's announcement yesterday, right? So because everything is like going well and it's like almost end of the long journey. Yes, we cannot agree with that because there's so many reasons we already told you. But now, especially like the Truth and the Reconciliation Commission has like so many problems. It's really terrible. Because they started like grading the victims of the Korean War. It's impossible, right? They are grading it because who is really innocent or not. So they already like gave the code name like 1-7 or something because like they are not innocent. So really is a serious problem, and also the TRC, they're like former the National Intelligence Service officer, who investigates the human rights defender, appeared violating the national security law, was appointed to the head of the investigation department in TRC. So a really big problem too. So now it has so many problems, but we cannot understood the Korean government's yesterday announcement. So also we have to mention so many of the victims because they are really waiting for hear their issues. So I have to just mention some of the victims, the groups. The victims who died under the mysterious circumstance and their bereaved families, and the victims of the forced conscription, and the victims who were forced to taken the Samcheong, the re-education camp, as you know, and so and what else? I just want to just mention that's it, right? Okay, and also the Korean. Recently, the victims of the overseas adoption, have begun to hold the Korean accountable for the fact that they were adopted overseas against their will, the suffering and the discrimination. The Korean government has a duty to listen and investigate the harm that caused the overseas adoptees. So they have a right to hear what happened in the past. So Korean government has to be apologetic to the overseas adoptees. That's what we think. So finally, now it's so many things, but it's still just like Mr. Seo said, the report is done, but our journey is start. So we have to say to our Korean government, the government that denies history, that does not deserve to talk about the future. So you have to remember that. So now, so we can just finish with that sentence. Is it okay, everybody? All right, guys. Thank you for the participating, everybody, and also the YouTube. Really thank you for in South Korea, and also thank you for the prepared all the events in here and our the steps. And also thank you for coming, the friend and Sarah. Okay, and then also our the super special reporter.
I agree.
I agree.
Just to thank you very much to all of you, to the civil society, Dr. King, that's all the team. Of course, my dear Gayum Baek. So I visited the country 3 times in different capacities, and I feel the country in my heart. So I'm willing to continue helping you and working side to side with you, even when I leave my mandate. So it was a real privilege for me to meet all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belli. You are the open invited. We are ready.
Yeah.
Anytime, feel free to come to South Korea. We welcome you. Thank you for the awards. So do we have take picture? The time
The
to
1
take
minute?
picture? Just 1 minute?
1 minute?
Yes.
Okay. 1 minute.
We need to run. Yeah, you have to run. Always. Yeah, he always runs, right? Just take a picture here. Come here, everybody. Sarah.
Shall I take it?
Are you?
Okay.
Really?
So you can all be in
Really?